Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey Kerr. I'm here today with a professional actress who's based in New York City. She made her Broadway debut in the original cast of the smash hit Wicked as the understudy to Idina Menzel as Elphaba and can be heard on the iconic cast recording. She went on to play Elphaba on Broadway in the first national tour and in Chicago. Her other main STEM credits include Miss Bassett in Finding Neverland and Grandma Josephine in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. She is also a professional voiceover artist and has been heard on national TV radio commercials for such brands as Subway, Almay Cosmetics, Chase Bank, PNC, and more. Not to mention that she is an original member of the New York Film Academy's musical theater faculty dating back to 2009, where she is the current chair of musical theater for the Professional Conservatory of Musical Theater. In 2019, she was named Young Alumni of the Year by her esteemed alma mater, the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, for her combined accomplishments in performance and teaching. Please welcome Kristy Cates.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Going back to the beginning, how did you first get started in the theater?
Yes, great question. So I am the youngest of six children. So I think when you're the baby of the family, you're a natural born performer sometimes because you have lots of people to entertain. I grew up in a small town called Pinole, California, which, fun fact, that's also where Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day is from. We had the same voice teacher, though he's a bit older than me. I loved musical theater from a very young age. I did kids acting group. I did, when I was a kid, I did a show at the local high school, which had wonderful productions. But I didn't know that you could actually go to school for it and have it be a career until I was in high school and I met a man by the name of Jim Coleman. He's the conductor on the Angela Lansbury Sweeney Todd. You have seen that video. He's from California, and he taught a master class that I took and then hired me to play the witch in Into the Woods that he was directing when I was 17 years old. And he said, you know what? I think that you are talented enough to make a career out of this, but you must study. You must go to school. Gave me some schools to consider. And yeah, up until that point, I thought I wanted to go to Yale Law. And then I did a total 180 to the world of hopefully professional musical theater, which is obviously where I ended up. But it's been in my blood for a long time. My dad was a great singer, though he had horrible stage fright. So he didn't really perform much. But none of my siblings, my mom, nobody else in my family is a performer. They're very supportive. They left it all for me to explore.
And as for where you did go to school, that would be the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. And I happen to be someone who's from Ohio. I mean, I lived far from Cincinnati, so nowhere near. But of course, I do have to ask you, what were your years like there?
I've been back since, obviously, but where I lived, there was not much around right there by the conservatory buildings. If we wanted adventure, we went downtown or out to somewhere called the Kenwood Mall. But since they have really built it up, there's a hotel, there's all sorts of restaurants and shopping. It's really fabulous. But, Cincinnati going from Northern California to Ohio was an adjustment, of course, especially because I don't think I owned an actual proper winter jacket until I moved to Ohio for that first winter, which was one of apparently the worst on record up to that point. But the school is wonderful. My class was amazing. In fact, my college roommate is Shoshana Bean, and Leslie Kritzer lived upstairs. Sarah Gettelfinger was also in our class. So it was quite thrilling for me to watch the Tonys this past Sunday, to have two of my closest college friends up against each other in the supporting actress in a musical category, and then also to be able to see Sarah perform and lots of other CCM alums. So that was exciting.
Yeah, in fact, I actually have a list of noted alumni from CCM in front of me right now. Others include, Christy Altomare, who went on to star as the title character in Anastasia on Broadway, Ashley Brown, who's originated the role of Mary Poppins on Broadway, Stephen Flaherty, Tony-winning composer of Ragtime, and someone who is currently based in Raleigh, North Carolina. I do have to shout out one of the producing artistic directors for one of my local regional theaters, Theater Raleigh, and that's Lauren Kennedy.
All wonderful people, yeah.
Of course, there's also Tony winners Faith Prince and Karen Olivo, and yeah, let's go on, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was a great place to go to school. When you're in a class with Shoshana, Leslie, Sarah, and the other people in that class, you really learned how to step up your game and really, focus on being better every day, which is something that is a skill that you have to keep always through this profession, your desire to keep learning and keep growing and push yourself. Yeah.
And I guess while we're on the subject, at the time of this recording, this year's Tony Awards just took place a couple days ago. And you mentioned then, two of your college friends were up against each other for Best Featured Actress in a Musical. Now, what were your thoughts on the Tonys overall?
For one reason or another, over the past like 6 or 7 years, 2016, 2017, I was in two different shows. So it was hard for me to see all of the nominated shows. Then, of course, we had COVID. This year, I made an extra special effort to see absolutely as many things as I could, which heightened the excitement because I had not just heard, about someone's performance or a production, but I'd actually seen them all. So I thought all of the musical numbers were fantastic. I really, obviously, we all are thrilled for all the winners. And my two favorites of the season were Outsiders and Merrily. So I was very excited for that. Yeah.
Wow, it sounds like you should be qualified to be a Tony voter.
I would love to be. Wouldn't that be fun?
And you got to make your Broadway debut in the original cast of a little-known musical called Wicked. How did you get involved with that?
I was in an off-Broadway show at the time, and at the same time, I was temping at a publishing company. Not temping, excuse me. I had started at this publishing company as a temp, and they were very flexible with me. I was the assistant to the mathematics editors, but they were amazing women that I worked for, and they let me go to all these auditions and callbacks. But, for anyone listening who might not know, most of the time when you're in an off-Broadway production, even if you're doing 8 shows a week, you're not making enough money to sustain yourself. I had basically a full-time job and was doing this off-Broadway show. Anyway, that's just a little side note. I got an audition for a new show that had tried out in San Francisco, of course, called Wicked. I went to my initial audition. I prepped for it. It was hard music. Fun fact, Seth Rudutsky actually was the person who coached me for my audition and my callback. Yeah, I just remember going in the first time for Stephen Aremus, the music director, and I had dressed kind of inappropriately for Elphaba because, I hadn't seen, there's no YouTube. There were not like phones on our cameras back in 2002, 2003, right? So I remember, a low-cut red shirt and a black skirt for my audition. And Craig Burns let my agent know that I should come back more plain, just in a plain black dress. And so I did that for my callback, and it was Steven Schwartz and Joe Mantello and the producers. And I cracked on Defying Gravity, and I was sure, forget it. Come to find out later that Idina had also cracked and then apparently yelled an obscenity in the middle after her audition. So I felt like I was in good company. But yeah, I had my one audition, one callback, didn't even have a dance call for that, which was sort of crazy. And then, I showed up on the first day of rehearsal. The only new people were myself, Chris Fitzgerald, who's playing Bach, I believe Bill Humans, who was playing Dr. Dillman, who's playing Dr. Dillman again. And of course, Joel Grey was the new wizard. So there were only 4 newbies that first day in the Broadway company. And I had a lot of catching up to do, but obviously it happened and it was a great experience. Yeah.
Oh, so you weren't in it when the show was out of town?
No, that was Stephanie Block. And then she got Liza in Boy from Oz.
Well, she also went on to have a nice career, but
No, absolutely.
yeah, and obviously, as the show was being put together, no one could have predicted how big Wicked was going to become. Now, what was it like for you getting to experience that?
It was a huge show. I think at the time it was the most expensive ever produced, something, or close. So there was a lot of pressure. We worked really hard. When you're in previews for a show, you are also rehearsing all day and making changes and putting in new dance steps or changing lyrics or costume or, trying to get it to the absolute most perfect state that it can be. I had never been anything of that scale, of course. And I was definitely feeling I don't know if tension is the right word, but everyone was on high alert to bring in their best self into the room each day. I remember specifically, like, we were really trying to figure out, I think Dancing Through Life was one that changed quite a lot through the rehearsal process. The dearly departed, who I miss so much, Carol Shelley, the original Madame Morrible, they had a huge reaction from the audiences in San Francisco. And I remember it was during previews or maybe opening night, and she just took me aside and she said, "You just can't even imagine what's going to happen tonight, because this audience, if they're anything like in San Francisco, you're going to feel like you're at a rock concert." the way they jump to their feet. So even with as much stress as we're all under, try to soak it in because this is why we do this. She was a really special woman and I heeded that advice. And yeah, I mean, to be in that huge theater, the Gershwin Theater, to take my first Broadway bow with that show, like it was overwhelming and amazing.
And I remember hearing a 2016 podcast interview with Rebecca Luker, who made her Broadway debut in the original cast of The Phantom of the Opera, and she talked about how at that point she was amazed that it was still running, equating it to like how, the very first job one ever had was at a restaurant that is still open many years later. Would you say you have similar feelings?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me feel old. I will tell you that to know that 20 years ago, 20 and a half now, I was part of something that has lasted so long and so strong, and it's a cultural phenomenon. And now we're getting the movie. I mean, I have to tell you, I can't wait to sit in the audience of the movie and hear who has my solo lines, and to see how they do that. And being part of a show like that, no matter what show you're in, at least in my experience, it's still a job. It's not like when you were a kid and you got to go to play practice or whatever. Like it's your job. So there's a different level of responsibility there. When I saw all my castmates, some of them for the first time in a really long time at the 20-year anniversary, it was like no time had passed. It was great. And sitting in the audience watching after 20 years, and I've seen the show a handful of times since I left. And I took my daughter, a few years ago, and it was really cool to see it through her eyes for sure. To be in that audience, that electric audience on the 20th anniversary, and just know that like we created something so special and so lasting, there's nothing like it. It's hard to put into words. I feel like if I never do anything else in my life, the fact that I was part of that, and then, as the third person to go on as Elphaba on Broadway, it's like, no matter what happens, no one can take that away from me ever. Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and for those who've listened to the original cast album, did you happen to have any solo parts on it, or were you just part of the chorus the whole time?
So in the opening number, I sang, "No one cries, they won't return." That's me. In the opening of Act Two, I sang, "I hear some rebel animals are giving her food and shelter." And it's really funny because I go into head voice on the recording, which I like hardly ever did on Broadway. And I was like, "Ooh, can I try that again?" They're like, "No, it's good." One of my prized possessions is we received platinum, like framed albums from the company, and it has my name and 1 million albums sold and all that. So
Yeah, and how long were you in Wicked overall?
I was in Wicked from 2003 until the very end of 2006.
Yeah, and what was it like for you, I guess, going from different companies from Broadway to the tour to Chicago?
Well, I'll tell you something. Tech is a big process, and to have experienced 3 separate techs basically for Wicked was a huge learning experience. Of course, on the tour, I was still on Broadway at the time, and Stephanie Block got injured. And so I had to fly up at the last minute to fill in for her before they had officially opened that first national tour. So that was a huge whirlwind. I had a great time up there in Toronto. I didn't make as deep of a connection with that company just because I wasn't there as long. And in Chicago, at first I covered Anna Gasteyer, and then I took over as Elphaba. I love traveling. I have never done a national tour that goes a whole bunch of different places. I've never had that experience, but I love touring. I loved meeting people and theater fans who come to the theater with their own perspectives. I really enjoyed my time in the separate cities that I did perform in, and still have lasting bonds of people I met at these different locations. I'm so grateful. And I think it's so cool to have been at the start of those 3 major productions of Wicked.
And from what I'm aware of, several actresses who've played Elphaba in the past have dreamed about that role. Has that happened to you?
I had a recurring dream for a while that they had changed Shiz into Hogwarts. I would show up. I hadn't gotten the new scenes that were with like the Harry Potter folks. And it's funny, I don't mind saying, I'm 47 years old. I don't anticipate ever playing Elphaba again, but I do have, they're not really nightmares, but dreams sometimes where they're like, "Okay, we don't have anyone you have to go on right now." And I'm like, "Oh God." I remember all the lyrics from all the songs. It's the scenes where I start to, in my dream, sweat and panic.
I actually spoke with Christine Dwyer a few years ago, and she told me how one of her nightmares came true, and that, well, they were like out of understays or something, so she got the call to come in at the last minute.
I love Christine. She's fabulous. It's like that idea of like, showing up to school and not knowing you have a test. It's like, I think we thrive on preparation and rehearsal, you know. I mean, you have to feel in order to step out on stage and do your best, you have to feel confident in what you're doing. You have to feel like you know what you're doing. You have to feel like you've rehearsed enough. And so I think that's part of like the psychology behind that, is to just go back in with no rehearsal. It's a sometimes super scary thing as a performer to bare your soul and, you know, your voice and whatever in front of a large crowd. I know for me, I always feel much more confident when I've had adequate rehearsal and preparation. So I think that's where that probably comes from.
Yeah, and earlier this month marks the 20th anniversary of when Wicked competed for and appeared on the Tony Awards, which that whole season was covered in the documentary Show Business: The Road to Broadway. Now, did you get to be a part of the telecast that year?
Yes, I did. So I was the original umbrella girl in the Emerald City. And I loved that because my mom, who lived in California, whenever she would watch anything on TV and it was the Emerald City costumes, you knew where I was because I'm the tallest thing on stage with my umbrella up in the air. So you may not see my face, but you definitely see that umbrella twirling, you know, in the Macy's parade, in the opening number of the Tonys that Hugh Jackman hosted. And then, of course, Idina did Define Gravity, and I'm one of those folks that runs down. And yeah, it was amazing. I met Tony Bennett backstage that night, which was thrilling.
For years, fans of the musical have been clamoring for a film adaptation, and this fall, their wish will finally be granted in more ways than one. Now, you've alluded to this earlier, but what are your thoughts on the movie coming out?
I'm super excited. I think it looks fabulous. I am a big fan of Cynthia Erivo, so I know that Elphaba is in good hands. I think the cast is wonderful, and I'm very excited to see a recreation of a world that I lived in so long. And you know, when you're on Broadway, of course, our set is incredible and the props are all amazing, but a movie can do a lot of things that you can't do on stage. So, you know, you have to fill in some blanks for yourself, I think, when you're watching a musical or in a musical, obviously. So I'm excited to see how those blanks that I've created for myself are similar or different based on what they're able to do just in a bigger setting and with CGI and those sort of things. So I'm excited. I was also excited to hear that when I was watching the trailer, so much of the dialogue is the same. I honestly can't tell you what I'm going to feel. You know, I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to she'll be 10 when it comes out, my 10-year-old daughter. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be wonderful.
And you've been teaching musical theater at the New York Film Academy since 2009. How did that opportunity come about for you?
There's a gentleman who started our musical theater program by the name of VP Boyle. He was a mentor of mine, and I'd taken a lot of classes with him, not at the New York Film Academy, but in his own private coaching business. That was both before Wicked and after. And, you know, he saw in me the ability to give thoughtful, constructive feedback and to give my fellow classmates, you know, ideas, other approaches, that sort of thing. And yeah, he really believed in me as a teacher, and he was the original chair of musical theater at the New York Film Academy. He hired me to be the song interpretation teacher back in 2009. I did that until 2014 when I became the creative director of the program, basically producing all of our live shows and continuing to teach. And then I got pregnant. And I remember I was producing, oh gosh, Wedding Singer at the time, like 7 or 8 months pregnant, and just it was crazy. My daughter was born singing because she was around it so much every day. Yeah, and then I was creative director through doing my other 2 Broadway shows and became the chair of the program 2 weeks before everything shut down with the pandemic. So that was a very interesting transition into that position in my department, and then trying to figure out how to do all of that, how to do musical theater on Zoom, which I don't want to go back to that time. That was difficult.
I guess to quote a song from Ragtime, we can never go back to before.
Never. I'm with you on that, Jeffrey.
Now, from all of your years in the industry, what do you think it takes to be successful in today's landscape?
I think that's a great word, landscape, because I think that it continues to be ever shifting, and we have to be willing to shift with it. We have to embrace that. I mean, I will tell you, like so many other actors, I loathe on-camera auditions, especially for musical theater when we have to film something, because I personally feel like I want to be in the room with someone so you can get my energy, so that you can hear the resonance of my voice. That being said, they aren't asking my opinion, right? They're telling me what I need to be doing. And so I think that one has to find a way to find the joy always in what you're doing. I had a great teacher that I took an on-camera class from just a few weeks ago, and he kept saying, no, you're not doing auditions, you're making movies in your apartment. So reframing it like that has helped me embrace it a little more. But I think that being said, you have to be aware. You have to be an advocate for yourself. I mean, I still take lessons, I still take classes. You have to be willing to continue to work on your craft. When you're in a show, you might not be working on it as much because every single night you are working on it. Doing Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I have to tell you, that show, even though I was Grandma Josephine, and so I wasn't singing anything crazy in the ensemble, I was belting a high E at the end of the opening number to singing, not a high E, a belted E, to then singing high C's twice in Act Two. So I really had to be cognizant and aware of how I was using my voice. So I think that whether you're in a show or not in a show, you always have to keep working on yourself and your abilities. Keisha Lewis was so eloquent saying, don't give up. You can't give up out there. And that's the other thing, you might get really discouraged and you might see others around you who are accelerating at a pace you want to be accelerating at, but we all have our own journey, and what is meant for you is going to happen, but you have to be proactive. Like, even if you have an agent and a manager, you have to be looking around at what's available out there and be willing to do the groundwork and to make things happen and stay creative and create your own concert work or your own show. Or a big thing for me when I was younger and I first moved to New York was I said yes to everything that was within, my integrity comfort zone. But I said yes to everything because you never know who you're going to meet. You never know who's going to be in the audience. You just never know what's going to happen. And if you are able to say yes and you're able to commit and show up and do a great job, that only makes you better, makes you look better, and opens doors that you might not even know are going to be there. Yeah.
And for those who'd like to pursue a career in the theater, where do you think would be a good place to start?
There's a big debate right now, and this might be a little weird saying this as the chair of musical theater at NIFA, but there's a big debate right now whether or not people need to go to like formal training. I will tell you that a lot of people who I know who are successful on Broadway did not have formal college training, but most of them do. And I think that if I have kids or tweens or teens out there listening, you want to find teachers and mentors that you trust. You want to say yes to opportunities and keep yourself open. I think that if you want a career in musical theater, obviously you can move to New York or Chicago or wherever and continue to train as you're auditioning. But a piece of advice that I got years ago from a casting director was, listen, it's my job to remember you. So if you come into the room and you still need 3 years of training, I'm going to remember that first impression. It doesn't mean you can't change someone's impression of you, of course, but you want to make sure that you feel very confident at the level you are at when you start to go for this professionally. There's a lot of things. There's negotiating contracts. There's how do I pick the right music? How do I cut a song? These are like skills that you need to have. And I think, if I may, something great about my program is that all of us who teach there are still active in the business. I had an opportunity earlier this year where I'm a character in an upcoming video game. And so I did motion capture suit. I had no idea what any of that was about, but now I can relay that information on what that is should I have a student come along that's interested in that. I always preach, and this is what we focus on at school here too, is you need a diversified actor's portfolio. Yes, your goal might be musical theater and Broadway, but it really helps if you know how to seize the opportunity for a voiceover audition or a print audition or something like that. Those are good ways to pay your rent when you aren't on stage all the time. So I guess it all goes back to keeping yourself open, learning as much as you can, surrounding yourself with people you trust, and just knowing that you might hear no a lot. And that's just the nature of the business. Most of the time, things completely out of your control. You're too tall, you're too short, you look like the director's ex-wife. Who knows? To believe in yourself and always keep yourself open and working on your craft.
And before we go, do you have any other upcoming projects that you'd like to share with us?
I did a bunch of concerts last year and earlier this year, which solo concerts, which were so fun, such a big challenge. We are currently working on a concert that's going to be presented at David Geffen Hall as part of the Asian Cultural Symphony. NIFA Musical Theater has been invited to David Geffen Hall to sing with the symphony. So we're going to start working on that pretty soon. Yeah, right now I'm continuing to make the school the best that I can make it and continue to take classes and auditioning. And yeah, we'll see what's next. I don't know. I'm in one of those moments where I'm like, all right, universe, I'm open. Here I am.
Well, Kristy, I thank you very much for devoting your time to this interview. It was great getting to talk to you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. You too.
And for those who'd like to keep up with your career, where can people find you on the internet?
Great. So I have a website that is currently under construction and being revamped, and it's just my name, KristyCates.com. But you can also find me on Instagram, which is Kristy_Cates.
All right. Thanks again for joining me today, Kristy. This was great.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Take care.